Welcome back, everyone. I'm Carrington-Russell, award-winning Australian author of action-packed fantasy romance, and I have an amazing author with us today. We are talking award-winning USA Today best-selling and has also won a gold medal for Readers a Favourite in 2018, which is an amazing feat. We are talking to the one and only A.L. Knorr. How are you, Abby Lynn?
I'm very well. How are you?
I'm
Thanks for having me.
fantastic. Yeah, I am so excited to have you on. We were just talking about your home in Turkey, which sounds phenomenal and super inspiring. So I would love to know what got you into the world of writing fantasy. What was your journey like at the start?
Well, my mom taught me to read when I was 3. So I've been reading stories since I was 3 years old. And apparently my parents tell me I could read better then than I can now. Because I would read out loud to them and sound the words out and everything. So I fell in love with story very, very young. And I actually went through a phase where I wanted to be an animator for Disney because I love the Disney stories. And but then as I grew up, I realized what it was involved in becoming an animator. And I was like, I don't have the chops for that, but I still love storytelling. And I did enjoy writing. Everything that I wrote was actually more like a screenplay because it was a lot of dialogue. And my mom would read my stuff and she's like, "You're so dramatic. Like everything you write is very dramatic, kid stories." And so I kind of had this dream of becoming an author since I was quite young. But as I grew up and I realized how difficult the world was in terms of going past the gatekeepers and getting an agent and then getting a publisher to buy your stuff, and then the risk involved in that, and the small amounts that the authors earned, and like all of this kind of just felt like a lot of barriers. So I was like, well, okay, I'm just going to put that aside because I have a lot of other things I'm interested in too. I went to school and studied dance. I got work in marketing and did marketing for many years with consumer packaged goods. And it's kind of a crazy story, but I was living in small town in the Canadian Rockies, working for a wonderful company that, like a bath and body company that made toxin-free soap and shampoo and everything. And I loved my job. And I was trying to write on the weekends, but I had no brain capacity left. Like at the end of the day, my work was so consuming and so cerebral that I just had nothing left to give. So, I kind of got 75% of the way through a manuscript. It took me forever. It wasn't very good. But still, this dream was in the back of my mind. But I never would have left that job if it hadn't been for falling in love with an Italian guy. He's a man from Naples who was in Calgary working in the oil industry. This was around 2014. And, fell in love with him, thought that he was the one. His job changed drastically overnight because the price of oil was volatile. And they said, you got to come back to Italy. And at the time, we hadn't been dating very long, but I was very into the relationship. And so there is nothing else that could have made me leave my job because I really loved it. I had a great network of friends. I had a great life there. I was mountain biking in the summers and snowboarding in the winters and loved the work. And I just needed something huge to spring me. And I really see it as serendipitous or the universe or God or whatever you want to call it. But there's no other reason I would have left. And so I left. I left that job within a week. I had 2 freelance contracts to tide me over. So that was like also like the universe kind of saying, do this. Moved to Venice, Italy, because he got moved to an office in Venice. And so we lived in Venice for 8.5 months. But during that time period, I was like, I know I want to do something for myself. I'm entrepreneurial. I've learned all this stuff from this corporate life that I've had. But I didn't know what that would be. And I stumbled across Michael Anderle's story. I don't know if you're familiar with his work. No, he's become a very successful indie author, and actually he's opened a now publishing company, and lots of other authors publish under him now. But at the time, he was writing Vampires in Space, I was just like, what? That seems so obscure and very specific. And he was doing very well with it, and I was just like, this is it, like indie publishing. I didn't know it was even a thing. I didn't know people could do it, and I went from like just listened to this podcast and I went from, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I want to do something for myself, to this is it. I'm 100% committed, no matter what. And I didn't have a lot of money in the bank. I didn't have a job. I had a few freelance contracts, as I said. I let them kind of expire without renewing them so that I could focus on working on developing like a launch strategy and a series and everything, not knowing anything like, will people like my storytelling? Will I just make 17 cents a month for the next 5 years? But I was really invested and committed to it. And it took me a year to write 2.5 books. In the year of 2016, I did no work. I earned nothing, which was really difficult for somebody who's been independent since they were a teenager. And I was in Italy, and I knew that if I went back to Canada, I wouldn't have the stomach to not have an income. I would get a job, and then my time would be diluted. So I stayed in Italy. During that time period, the true colors of the man I was in love with came out, and I ended up having to leave him. That was an experience in and of itself, very learning experience. But I had met a friend in Northern Italy, and she said, don't go home. Like, I have 2 apartments in my villa that are empty. Just come stay with me while you write your books. And I was like, okay, I'll do that. So I moved up into this little apartment in a villa in a very tiny town in Trentino on a mountainside that's like super steep. It's a beautiful area, apple trees and orchards everywhere, skiing and everything. And I kind of got adopted by this Italian family who were just wonderful to me this whole time. And I became friends with them and wrote 2.5 books. And I remember sending my first book away to my editor and waiting for several months, like while she worked with it, and not thinking like, oh no, like, is it really bad? And I remember getting her email and opening the email up and going like, okay, breathe. And I like look at it, and the first line is, did you know that you're a writer? And I was just like, oh, like, thank God. She loved it. She loved the story. And that gave me so much encouragement and so much confidence to keep going. And I launched that book at the very, very beginning of 2017. And I had another book written, and that was kind of part of my strategy to get things going. And my goal that year, the first year, was just to replace my income. And I did that. So I'm very relieved, very happy. And yeah, no looking back. I just wish I'd done it sooner.
What was that? What was the first book?
It was Born of Water, and it's the one that won the gold medal from Reader's Favorite.
That's amazing. So that story is romantic in itself, in the way for your writing as well, being able to go to Italy, explore that, and then write your book, and then have those opportunities that came along so you could finish these manuscripts, but also having the courage as well to pursue that, because it's not something that everyone is brave enough to do. It's very scary as it is to go independently published, because you don't know what to expect. And I think that's amazing. But not only that, you actually had a plan going into it. So you did the research that you needed to do, instead of getting giddily excited publishing the first book and then thinking, okay, now what do I do? You'd already prepared for that, which I think is amazing. What was it like for you when you got a gold medal from Reader's Favorite? Because that is an amazing accomplishment. I believe that was in 2018. So what was
it was
for you?
It was a bit surreal. I remember, I mean, it was in Miami, like the ceremony was in Miami, and I got to meet lots of writers and talk to some journalists, and just, it was very validating and encouraging and just a really nice experience. But I learned that you're not going to win these things unless you put yourself out there. And if that's one of your goals, to get recognition from a book contest or a writing contest or whatever, then put yourself out there and submit for them. You know, if you don't submit, then you're just not, it's not going to happen, because they're not going to find you out of the blue. So, and that was something, it's a big education, becoming an indie author and learning how these things work. It's like, well, you know, before that, it's kind of like, well, if I just write a great book, people will come out of the woodwork and they will love me for it. But actually, there's a million books written every year, and they're not going to find you by accident. You have to put yourself in their way. And that, like you say, it does take a bit of courage. And I was lucky in that at the time I had ended my relationship. I didn't have I don't have kids. I didn't have a mortgage. I didn't have a pet. I didn't have any commitments that so many people have. And so I applaud authors who have families and children and even jobs. Like I just, it blows my mind that there are some writers who produce work regularly, prolifically, and they work full time. Like, how do you do that? They're my heroes. It's probably you. I don't know. Do you have a family?
No. I am not that hero yet. Not yet. I can barely look after myself, let alone a family. But
relate to that.
What was the aha moment for you that you realized, I'm a real author? This is real. This could be my career. When was that moment for you?
Well, there's two parts to that answer. One is, I don't think I've had that moment yet. Yeah, like, imposter syndrome makes you think like you're just kind of a poser and you're a faker, and that feeling never really goes away, at least not for me. There's one side of the brain. The other side of the brain is like, readers reach out to me regularly telling me what my work means to them and how much they love it and how excited they are for the next thing. And that tells me that this is real. And then the other thing was the fact that I can do this for a living and I can support my family. And, my husband's business was smashed almost overnight. And that's, I'm able to support him. He was so generous to me in the beginning, because when we first met, I was really struggling. I had some really terrible sales days where I was just like, oh, what am I doing? This is so hard. And he was so supportive, and now it's my turn. I can support him, because that's an amazing feeling. It's incredible to be able to support your loved ones, keep food on the table.
It's so difficult overcoming imposter syndrome at the best of times, but let alone when your financial income is so dependent on the product that you've created, and it's not because of anything that you have done right or wrong, but you're just not seeing it. And so you do take it personally because you think, oh my goodness, like, do people not like it? What am I doing? I should be making it with this. So there is a lot of pressure in that sense too. So it's always inspiring to hear that you were able to overcome that, be in the position you are, because it's an obstacle most authors have to overcome. There is a long period where you won't necessarily be getting the income that you want, but you will get there if you keep trying and if you keep changing things and just trying new things. We're creative, so think outside the box and do what you need to do to make it work. I really want to talk about your Origin Elemental series, because I love those covers, and it is such I want to say complex storyline, because you have so many different storylines coming off that, because you have different characters in each series. So I would love to know, one, what is this main series about, for readers who haven't read it, and two, who's your favorite character? You can only choose one.
Oh gosh, that's hard. That series, it's amazing how it kind of came about, because the Born of Water story is a mermaid fantasy, and it is full on wish fulfillment for me, fantasy fulfillment, because ever since I was a kid, I have loved nautical history, marine biology, anything to do with oceans and seas. If a documentary came on that was about fish or octopus or even algae, I would just be like, oh, I would love it. I loved it. And I loved shipwrecks, and like, how does that happen? And what do they look like now? What does the sea do to them over the years? What's the salt do? And how cool would it be to explore the underwater world as a mermaid? Because I had a bad experience with scuba gear. It scared me. So it was just like, I can just go into my mind and imagine having fins and not being encumbered by all that stuff that humans have to wear. And going into the Titanic and seeing, the chandeliers and the ballrooms. And it's a very tragic thing, but it's also fascinating to me. So that story is a mermaid story, a mermaid fantasy and a romance, but it's also a love letter to the sea from me. And writing that book, I think writing your very first book from start to finish is a very special experience that you can never replicate, because it's your first time going through that experience of the character arc and the scenes, and that character of Targa, I think, is probably more me than any of my other characters. And when I wrote that and I got such great feedback about it, and the title was already Born of Water, I was thinking, she's got girlfriends. What if I turn this into a series about elemental magic and I create Born of Fire, Born of Earth, Born of Air? And so I took her friends and I started developing their stories. And that was once I got into the actual business aspect of it and the strategic part of launching it, I did it very intentionally that their stories happen at the same time. So the first 5 books all happen simultaneously, and the characters are tied to one another through their text messages. So you get hints about things happening in the other girls' lives. And that's, rather than having a linear series that pulls you through from the end, you start, from the end of book 1, you start into book 2, and it continues on chronologically. I needed a reason for readers to pick up that next book, because Born of Water is a complete story by itself. So that's why I created the text message between the girls, and the series is based around elemental magic. It just kind of made a lot of sense to me. I have a Born of Water. What else should I do? Born of Fire, Born of Earth, Born of Air, because elemental magic is one of my kind of favorite magic systems to think about. And it worked also in terms of marketing strategy, because readers now have 5 potential entry points. I mean, the series is 6 books, but any of the first 5 books can be picked up and read as a standalone. And I did that intentionally so that I could market each one of these books over the first year and a half of the writing of that series, and keep fresh readers coming into the series at all times. Because otherwise, if it's linear, you can only really put book 1 on sale and try and get more readers into that series, and then trust that they have, the read through works and they continue on. With this, I can advertise any of those 5 books, and they each got their time. And that is, I think, why I was able to replace my income in the first year, is because I wrote a non-linear series. And it just kind of worked out. And so the story itself you're asking about, these girls are they're in, I think, grade 11, going into the grade 11 year. And they're each going somewhere different for the summer. So they're really close knit. It's actually 4 girls that are really close knit. And then the 5th elemental doesn't know them, but she becomes important later on. And they each go somewhere. So Targa goes to Poland, and Georgie goes to Ireland, and Akiko goes to Japan, and Saxony goes to Venice, which is where I was when I wrote that book. And then Petra goes to Libya, and they each have a supernatural experience that changes the nature of their being. And when they come back together, they have to face a darkness or an evil that's actually immune to their collective strength. Except for the 5th elemental, who's kind of the secret, who she's kind of the strongest of all of them, even though she's an outsider. So each of these stories has its own, it's all contemporary fantasy, but it has its own flavor. So I have a mermaid story. I have a fire magi who's dealing with fire magic. I have a fairy tale / ghost story. I have demon hunting and Japanese mythology influenced story. And then I have like archaeology, digging in the desert. So each one has a different flavor, because I wanted to kind of flex my storytelling muscles and see what I liked and stuff. So that's kind of how that kind of all happened.
Yeah. First of all, like, having multiple entry points is so clever, and the fact that you have 5 is phenomenal. But also, I want to know how much research you had to do, because all of those, as you said, are very broad. They're very different, especially in trope, as well as having the setting. Are those all locations that you have physically been to as well?
They're not. No, they're a mix. So I haven't been to Poland. I would love to go. I have lived in Venice, which is why I set that story in Venice. Venice is amazing. I have been in Ireland. I actually left when I was 17. I went to Ireland and England for a whole year. I traveled around and I danced with an Irish band, and I tried to get it. I know, random, eh? Which when river dance was really big when I was a teenager, and so I learned how to river dance, and I danced for years and years and years with this smaller troupe called Emerald Fire, 10 girls, and that was a blast. But anyway, so I had lived in Ireland for a while, love Irish mythology and Irish history. And Japan is not a place that I've been to, but I would love to go one day. And I just was so fascinated by samurai mythology and the Yakuza and all that. And I have not been to Libya. But so for those two books, the one that was Born of Ether, which is set in Japan, I hired a Japanese cultural expert, basically, to read that story and give me feedback, because that story goes back and forth in time, and I needed it to be as accurate as possible. What was it like to be a Japanese villager 100 years ago? So, I was really appreciative that she read that and gave me feedback. And then the one set in Libya, in the Sahara, I hired an archaeologist to read that story and make sure that I had as many inaccuracies removed as possible. And he was amazing. Like, he sent me 4 or 5 pages of very detailed information, so I could make sure that the scenes that are written about archaeology and the way that a dig works and what they do with their finds and everything is all accurate. And I had readers email me and say they really appreciated that. They felt like there was a level of authenticity there that helped to ground the story and really make you feel like you could suspend your disbelief.
Yeah.
So it's worth doing that for sure, at least for me. If you haven't been somewhere, get help, get somebody to read your story and give you input.
That's amazing. I think that's great advice too, because not everyone would necessarily, I want to say, do as much in-depth research as such as hiring or outsourcing somebody who would have that knowledge. So I think that's a really good note to take. What advice then would you have? Because obviously you have this complex world, as fantasy usually is, let alone when you have 5 entry points and 5 main heroines. But what would your advice be to authors, like as in managing that kind of information? Do you have a book Bible? Where do you store it all?
Yeah, it kind of grew organically, the system, because when you're starting out, you don't really know how to keep everything straight, right? And it's very intimidating. And especially when you're writing a long series, like 6 books is a fairly long series. How far do you plot? Like how much do you need to know as an author? And I guess everybody has to figure that out for themselves. But for me, not long after I launched, a reader from Canada, Canadian lady from the East Coast, and my main hometown is in the East Coast. So she, she's from Antigonish. She reached out to me and she was like, I love your stuff. If you ever want a beta reader or, help or anything, I'd be happy to help you. So the relationship started from an author to a fan, getting feedback and beta reading kind of help. And then it transitioned into, she began to edit my work and she was quite good at it. And then she started taking editing courses and started an editing business as time went on. So she's now got other clients, but she edits, majority of my work. And then it became, I need help keeping things organized. Why don't you create a chronology? So she uses Aeon. It's a chronology software. And anytime I write a story, she creates a chronology for that book and fits it in with all the rest. So I can go into that file at any time and see where the characters are at any point in time and what they're doing, what's happening in their story. And that's really helpful. But I would say I've learned that I can't plot too deeply or in too detailed of a manner too far ahead, because too much changes in the writing process. You have to have flexibility and flux, because as you're writing a scene, you might be able to think of the story at the 30,000 foot level and go, okay, these are the main points and this is what happens. But actually, once you get into writing a scene, I'm sure you know this feeling. Sometimes things just take a left-hand turn and you're like, I didn't know that was going to happen, but I kind of like it. Yep. And then everything changes, right? Like, so you've done all that initial work to then only have to change it. So I've learned that I plot one book at a time with a very high level idea of how the series ends. I do always need to know how it ends before I begin, because that's what I am aiming for. Yeah. But I don't get too specific, and my outlines are not very detailed. There's a lot of room in them for things to just happen and change.
What is the rough word count of your books, and how long does it usually take you to write them?
I've slowed down now just because I don't have to write like a maniac to try and get so many books out. So in the beginning, Born of Water was 90,000 words. And after that, the books got smaller. So the rest of them are between 60,000 and 70,000 words. And Born of Water took me 9 months, being my first book. Born of Fire took me 6 months. Born of Earth took me 3 months, and Born of Ether took me 1 month. And when I wrote a book in 1 month, I was like, okay, that's too fast. So it was kind of figuring out like what I could handle, how fast I could push it. So for several years then, up to year 4, I would say I was writing a book every 2 months and launching every, I would say not quite every 3 months, but maybe every 2.5 months or so. But I've slowed down now because the latest series that I've written is 130,000 words per book. So it's more epic, and it's taking me longer, and it's a bigger project, way bigger cast. It's a slightly adjacent thing. It's not contemporary, it's epic. So it's different for me. So that's a new experience.
So when do you celebrate your 5-year anniversary?
I celebrated it in November with a glass of bubbly, and I tried to bring out a hardcover with a dust jacket for Born of Water, but the graphic design didn't end up going. It was beautiful, but it didn't end up going the way that I expected it to go, and so I didn't bring it out because I didn't want to have readers buy this one-off product that doesn't match anything else. And I knew that if I was going to do a 5-year anniversary or dust jackets for all of them, then I needed to look great and continuous and stuff. So yeah, I didn't end up bringing that out, but that's okay. I'm going to find the right artist and do it when I'm ready. I did finally bring out a book with a dust jacket, book 1 of the Scented Court series, and it's gorgeous. And I'm very happy with that. So that was kind of a new thing for me as an author. I'd always done just little paperback books.
That's interesting. And talking about book covers, I love this topic because, as you said, sometimes it just doesn't meet our expectation, or sometimes there's challenges in book covers. And I love your covers. So first of all, who is your cover designer? But how do you relay what you're after specifically to your cover artist? Or do you say, this is a concept, have at it, and we'll see whether it fits?
Yeah, I've learned a lot about covers. I had some experience working with graphic designers in my previous job, so I knew how to prepare like a creative brief for artwork, which kind of helped, definitely. But at the same time, I had to go through a bit of a painful learning curve. My very first covers, they were designed by Deranged Doctor Design, who do really nice work. And I really liked them. And I remember when I first got Born of Water, my very first cover, I just stared at it for, I don't even know how long, like just stared at it. I just was like, I don't know what I think about this. Like, it's beautiful, but is it right? Is it my character? Does it suit the story? I didn't know really. But I went with it. I liked it. And it's still the paperback cover. But I ended up rebranding those covers and not changing them drastically, but changing them enough, because the first covers don't say magic at all. They just say girl in a foreign setting, young, YA, young adult in a foreign setting, adventure story. So I needed to change that to add something that said magic, elemental magic. And so I used the same characters, the same models, the same color, language, and just had another company called Demonza redesign them because I wanted a fresh eye, and not because I was unhappy, just because I, as an author, decided that it's really important that these say magic. Otherwise, how does the reader know at a glance? So I changed those in 2019. And so then Deranged Doctor did the first, Demonza, and Demonza is quite good. They're very quick, like they will turn around a cover in 2 weeks. So I used them for several other series, but I do use different designers. Orina Cave did the Arcturus Academy series. She has a very interesting hand-painted application that I really like. And then for the epic fantasy series, I use a company called Mibble, M-I-B-L. They have an illustrator that I love that has a very whimsical style that I thought suited the Fae. And this series is very, it's a lot about beauty, the beauty of nature, flowers, insects, flora magic and fauna magic. So I wanted something that was really not cartoony, but illustrated in a soft, bright way that would attract readers who like that kind of thing, and it's typography. There's no characters on it, so it really does depend on what I'm writing. I'm happy to try out different artists, but I do know that a lot of authors stick with the same artist for everything that they do, and that is also very powerful. Like, it's actually a very smart thing to do from a branding perspective. Yeah, so there's a few that I've worked with, and I think that giving them an idea of the story, the important beats of the story, and then being very specific with the kind of mood that you're trying to put out in the world and the kind of reader you're trying to attract, then a cover designer often comes out with something that I think is even better than what I was imagining.
So how were you able to step back and decide, I don't feel like this is conveying magic? Because it's very hard, because we do become very attached to our covers, or sometimes we just can't take ourselves outside of the box anymore because we think we've spent this amount of money on that, or I still think it's a fantastic cover. Were you asking for reader feedback, or were you able just to have a particular conversation with yourself to really evaluate it?
Yeah, it was a little bit of both. I do have a reader group on Facebook, a private group of people that have to answer 3 questions to get in. So it's not open, it's not wide open to everybody. And I did that very specifically because I want A, to keep the group small, and B, to make sure that they were actually fans of the stories. And I asked them for feedback. I do polls regularly. I'm always kind of asking them like what their expectations are, because they are a core group who've supported me, many of them since the beginning. And a lot of them are my ARC readers, who are amazing and so kind. They are fantastic with posting reviews immediately on launch day and giving me encouragement when I'm feeling exhausted or sick or whatever. So I do bring them into the process as much as I can, with a grain of salt that, what's that saying? Sometimes consumers don't know what they want until they're presented with it. Right. So at the same time, while I want to give them what they want, I also want to give them something new and fresh that will excite them, that they weren't necessarily expecting. So that conversation that you have with yourself, that is definitely what I went through when I changed those covers. And it happened, a year, 2 years into my career. When you're first starting out, you're learning so much, and you are bombarded with information, and you're learning about metrics and rank and metadata and blurb writing and all these things that you're learning about. And as time goes by, your focus starts to narrow and narrow and narrow on the things that are really important, the levers that you can pull that help you control your path. And covers are, you can't overstate how important they are. And so I felt it was really critical that I make that change, because as I spent more time in looking at other authors' covers and reading other books, I think you really have to, you're like a lighthouse. You have to really project very strongly what it is that you're doing and what you're about, in order to attract the right readers, and rather than trying to be attractive to everybody. Yep. That micro targeting is so important. And that's where it seems people find the most success. Like, I didn't know that there's micro niches like vampires in space, Amish, dinosaurs, like whatever micro niche you can think of, it's out there. There are some people who do very well just writing Elizabeth Bennet fan fiction, and they make a full-time living at it. That's all they do, is they write about Elizabeth and Darcy, and it's just it's like those kind of stories with those characters, and that's all that readers want from them. So you really learn a lot when you're first starting. The first few years, you probably went through that in your early days, it's like a tidal wave of information.
I'm really curious though, because you had a bit of a marketing background prior to going into the publishing industry. Some of that knowledge can be converted, which is great. But what was the most surprising thing to you in the publishing industry?
I think it was that, now this is going to sound maybe a little bit jaded. I don't mean it to sound this way. It was just like something that I had to learn about the true nature of the industry. New York Times best-selling books are not necessarily the best books out there, although books are subjective. One person can absolutely fall in love and the other can think it's absolute trash. If you have money behind you, marketing dollars, you can make a run at that list. and you can get those letters. So to me, it was a bit of a surprise to learn how much of your success has to do with your marketing budget and how you deploy those funds. And only a little bit has to do with the quality of the book itself, the story.
Yeah.
And that was a big shock to me. I did have a marketing background. I do have a lot of those skills that I could use, but I really had to learn about the industry. And that was a bit like, wow, okay. So it's the people that have money who can claw their way to the top who get recognition, because this is something that you see very regularly. Best-selling books, traditionally published books. I've read indie authors' work that is better, in my opinion, and I would rather get into their universe than this best-selling multi-million dollar, you know what I mean? So it is a lot about firing those pistons with money. And that was like, okay, it's a business. What did I expect?
And I love the honesty in that answer as well, because I think it is very surprising for a lot of people, especially when you go in very much as an underdog and you're new to it and you don't realize how much you have to put into it. And it is very small steps. If you don't have a large budget to start with, you have to slowly build those blocks to get to that point. Right. One thing actually I did notice, which I love about you, like I was going to talk about social media, but more specifically TikTok, because one, I love your quirky videos, they're great. I have started following you, but you also give great advice on there. You offer knowledge to newer authors, programs that might assist them. And I thought that was really amazing that you're taking that time. But why TikTok specifically did you decide to share that with? Why that platform?
I guess I got into TikTok because a fellow author got onto it several months before me. She had a TikTok go viral and it really boosted her career, which was really exciting. And I was so happy for her. And I also have a bit of a drama background. Like I was an actress for a spate of years, a decade or whatever. And I have that side of me. I find it easier actually to act than I do to be myself. Like standing up on a stage in front of a whole bunch of people, it's actually scary to do that kind of as your own self, but it's not scary to do it as when you're playing someone else. So I got into TikTok mostly out of curiosity, not necessarily sure that what I was going to use it for, because I didn't know what its capabilities were. And then I remember being so excited about it that I could hardly sleep for like 10 days or something. And I was constantly making videos and just learning curve again. And I fell in love with the fun of it because it really is so much fun. Like you can just goof off and act, or you can, give educational material. You can make it whatever you want. So I just went through a learning phase, trying to figure out how I fit into it, not really knowing what the objective was for it. So I would, if somebody wanted to open a TikTok account specifically for their author name, I would say, just think about the objective ahead of time, because I didn't. And I was just I went on there and I started making stuff and just thinking like, I don't know if I'm going to keep this. I still don't know if I'm going to keep it actually, but I learned from it. And I loved being able to see the faces of the other authors in my world and what, that they're facing the same struggles as me. And, that, authors are so often introverted, and that was a place where they could kind of come out of their shell a little bit. And, you got to connect with people and support people. And I find in general, a lot of social media is actually antisocial in a sense, because, it's digital, and if you're making a post or a picture or whatever, you're projecting a certain idea into the world or persona into the world of who you are. Whereas on TikTok, it feels a little bit more genuine, a bit more human, because you get to see people's expression. Like if somebody's feelings are hurt or they've been bullied or whatever, you can see the pain on their face and in their voice. And that is really impactful. And it's very hard not to have empathy for somebody when that's what they're putting out there into the world. Whereas it's much more difficult for people to have empathy for a tweet. You know what I mean? So I love that about the TikTok platform. And I think I was giving back because people gave to me, in the beginning, not authors necessarily, but just people in general. They were so supportive. I had friends feeding me when I had no money, because for that whole first year in 2016 when I was writing, I had no job, I had no income. I really had very little saved up. I was taking a huge risk. There were times when I couldn't afford a cappuccino. It was my favorite thing to go to a cafe and write and order a cappuccino. I loved that. But I couldn't always afford it. I mean, people were taking care of me. So that is just like coming full circle and giving back in the way that I can. I wish I could give back more. Like I hosted a few TikTok lives, and I had people reach out to me after and be like, wow, what you told me really changed the way I thought about everything. And it just makes me feel so good that if I help even one or two people, along this road, then I feel good about that. So yeah, that's kind of why I was just kind of sharing a little bit of what I thought might be helpful. It comes naturally to me to want to help people. If they come to me with a problem that I have some experience with, oh, this is what you should do. Listen for a second, Yeah. So TikTok is amazing for that.
Speaking of, conveying yourself authentically and connecting, what has been your most memorable reader interaction moment?
I would say I met a reader. I was in Columbus for an event, and I met a reader whose name was Derek. He lives in Columbus, or was living close by. And he drove in when he knew that I was there. He drove in to meet me, and we got to sit in the lobby of the hotel and chat for a little while. And he told me about his life and how, he's looking after his mom who wasn't well at the time, and what my books meant to him. And it's amazing to sit down with a real person and connect with somebody who was really affected by you. You did something good in their life, even if it was just to give them a moment of escape from their struggle and their worry. So, and he wrote to me, not that long ago, a few months ago, and just said, I'll always cherish that memory. And I was like, yeah, me too. Like, it was really lovely to meet him, because I don't get to meet very many readers in person, because I live so far away and I'm introverted anyways. I don't really like big events and crowds. I get to, interact with them online and stuff, but it really isn't the same as being in person. And I was able to give him a hug and, just have that human moment.
Oh, I love that. And it's so magical when you know that something that you have created, you have poured your heart and soul into, has somehow connected with somebody that you've never met before on the other side of the world, and yet they've really taken something powerful from it. There's no other moment like that. It's such a special moment that we as authors get to keep. So I love that you had that. I really want to talk about audiobooks as well, because one thing I love about your website, I love everything about you, but one thing on your website that I found really clever was you actually had a sample of all your audiobooks on one of your pages specifically. So audiobook is a very interesting platform and playground to be in. What made you decide to take that leap, and how did you find the process? Do you have any advice for viewers?
Oh, that was audio. I feel like is something I'm still figuring out. I find it's more difficult to market audiobooks. I do have friends that are doing quite well with Facebook ads and things like that. I haven't cracked the code on that just because I've been focused on writing. And in the beginning, I couldn't afford to bring out my own audiobooks. So I licensed them to LMBPN, which is a publishing company that Michael Anderle owns. He's the one I mentioned at the beginning. I actually wrote 4 books for his universe, because he has a mega universe that a lot of authors write in. And at the time I was like, when they asked me to write in that, I was like so excited. So I wrote 4 books for that. And at the same time, I was like, he was bringing out audiobooks and stuff. So we have a contract for that. The first 6 books, the Elemental Origin series. After that, I had enough money to start bringing them out myself. But I would say I still don't hold the key to making audiobooks really successful. However, I have licensed my German audiobooks to a lovely lady who runs Shooting Star in Germany. And she's going bananas with them. Like, she's doing so well with them. She just brought them out over the last less than a year, I think. And we had a conversation 2 days ago, and she's so excited and so happy with the way that they're going. She has a big background in audiobooks and just went out on her own. So she's got all this experience, but she's starting her own company. And so I was really happy to hand off that job to somebody else who is a professional and has the connections and networks. She's bringing those books out on 300 different platforms to German listeners. Yeah. So I'm still working with an amazing narrator. She's actually an actress as well. We're bringing out books in North America. And that process if you have a good narrator and a good producer, you can really trust them with the work. As long as you're making the right choice for the voice and of the person telling your story, that's really critical. And then you can just decide, are we going to do this in a share situation? Am I going to pay for it up front and keep the royalties? And I've done both. I think it's wonderful that we have options. And I think audio is growing, and it's going to become easier to market as platforms continue to grow. It feels like it's 10, 15 years behind the digital book market, right? So there's not a ton of ways you can market it. There's like Chirp if you're wide. There's Facebook ads. Of course, my Amazon ads dashboards, I can't advertise my audiobooks, so I don't have that option. I don't know why or when that's coming. I'm sure it'll change at some point. You can obviously do swaps and things like that with other authors who have audiobooks in the genre. But I definitely feel like there's a lot to learn there for me. I'm not an audiobook Yoda. I have so much to learn.
But that's the exciting thing too, is that there is always so much to learn. And I like too that you have honored yourself in the fact that you have gone, this is not my strength at the moment, and I would rather focus on my writing. So I will give this to a professional, and obviously read over the contract and things like that. But I love that you've done that you've been able to focus just on your writing and make new opportunities for yourself through that. One of my favorite questions to ask is, what is the biggest goal? What is the dream that you're chasing for your career?
Well, I think there's a dream that I don't have a whole lot of control over, and that is a television series, like a Netflix series or something. I mean, what author doesn't have that as the pie in the sky, crazy goal? And I have had inquiries, but it's very, there's so many hoops to jump through and so many times that you have to wait for green lights, and it's so out of your control. And even if it gets to that place, it's probably going to change a lot because TV writers have to do their thing with it and stuff. So I don't have any control over that, but it is the pie in the sky dream. In terms of just my writing, I have 3 series, 3 different ideas that are they're here. I have to get them out. And over the next couple of years, that's kind of my focus. But I would say my dreams have kind of come true. I'm so blessed. I'm so lucky to be able to do what I love and make a living at it and not have to answer to anybody else for my creative choices other than my readers, of course. So yeah, I guess I'm maybe still in the dreaming stage, past this next few years of writing. What comes next, I'm not really sure. Yeah.
I do have a segment called Speed Dating with an Author. It's basically 5 rapid questions. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. What is the clumsiest moment you've ever had?
So I was walking down the stairs. This is high school, the worst time in the world for this to happen. The last set of 3 stairs, I fell down them and landed on my knees in front of the high school jock. And he looked down and went, "Well, you're down there." It's a moment that I was just so totally red, completely embarrassed. This was in the main lobby of the school in front of everybody, and I was so painfully shy. So yeah, that's forever ingrained on my trauma memory.
That's so cheeky.
Oh, it's just, yeah.
What
Thanks
are
for asking.
3? Yeah, thank you for telling me. Thank you for being honest. What are the 3 words that would best describe you?
I would say empathetic, old-fashioned, and I would say deep. I spend a lot of time thinking about the deep things of the universe.
What is your life motto then?
I would say I just believe that life is about relationships, and people will remember how you made them feel even decades and decades afterwards.
What is a song that best describes you?
Oh, if you'd asked me that before I met my husband, I would have said Here I Go Again by Whitesnake, because I was constantly, traveling around the world and getting involved in something new, usually relationships or whatever. But now it's actually wordless fantasy music. Every single day I listen to beautiful fantasy music while I write, and that's become the signal for this period of time in my life, I guess.
Is that on YouTube?
Yeah, there's so much on YouTube.
I do the same.
You too?
Yeah, when I'm
It's
writing.
fabulous. I love it.
What is a unique skill or talent that you have that not a lot of people know about?
I can bake a very good oven pancake.
Ooh.
Yeah, like a German pancake. So you melt the butter and first and you get it nice and brown, and then you pour the batter in and the butter like goes over top, and then you bake the whole thing and it like puffs up like crazy and becomes kind of crispy on the edges, and you have it with like peaches and whipped cream and a bit of maple syrup, or you can have a little bit of cheese in there to add some salt. It's like divine. I'm really good at it. It's like the only thing I can cook.
Well, I want to eat in your household by the sounds of it. That sounds
Yeah.
amazing.
You do. I married a chef, so you do want to eat in my house.
Yeah, I'm definitely coming to stay in Turkey with you guys. You've sold me on this trip. Oh, goodness.
Brilliant.
I have had so much fun, Abby. Lynn, how where do we find you? Where do we stalk you? What's coming out? What do we need to know?
Oh, I am, of course, on Amazon because I'm a Kindle Unlimited author. So you can find me there under A.L. Knorr. And the K, I know everybody pronounces it with a soft K because that's what we grew up with, words like knife, etc. But it is actually a hard K, Knorr. And you can find me at www.alknorrbooks.com. That's my website. You can find me on Facebook, A.L. Knorr Books. You can find me on Instagram, A.L. Knorr Books. And you can find me on TikTok at author A.L. Knorr. And I'm working on books 2 and 3 of the Scented Court series, which is a epic fae fantasy for YA readers. So it's going to take me the rest of the year, I think, to finish that series because those books are very long. So books 2 and 3 that it's coming out this year, and probably a novella as well.
That's so exciting. Well, watch this space. I'll be watching what happens this year because now I kind of stalk you just a little bit. But also, who knows? Maybe we'll be able to get you back on next year. Who knows?
Oh, it'd be such a pleasure. I've had such a nice time. Thank you so much for asking me.
Absolutely. And I hope you have an amazing day. And I'm going to love you and leave you.
Thanks, Kia. Thank you so much.
That's all right.
Best of luck.
Thank you. You too. Bye, guys.
Bye.